Hi, folks. Mr. Williams here. We're just going to do some review here talking about George Washington. The goal is this week that we can get through Washington and focus our attention on the next presidency that comes after that. But we're going to focus a little bit again since it's been a few days. And this will kind of feed into the assignment that you did yesterday, Monday, whether you were in person or online. So a couple of things that we have to remember about Washington is that he wins every vote in the Electoral College twice. He did that in 1789, and he also did it in 1792. And the big reason for that is because he was extremely popular. He was a war hero. He was someone that was trustworthy. He was someone that the people admired. And so as soon as Washington says, yeah, I'm going to run for president, the election's pretty much over. And now everybody's kind of trying to, get second place, because originally the way that you set things up was if you were first place, you were the president. Second place, you were vice president. We know nowadays that system would clearly not work because of political parties, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But again, because this election is so unique and we don't have any situation of campaigning or like giving speeches, advertisements, none of that. Washington's going to receive every electoral vote specifically on his reputation, like who he is. You're not going to find a person in American history that the majority of the people in the country looked up to the way they did with Washington. And that's just the way it is. Okay. So John Adams is second place. So he automatically is the vice president. Okay. And so that's going to change by 1804, but this is the way we're going to stick with how we choose a president and a vice president in the immediate future. Okay. In his cabinet position, the group of advisors, these are all newly appointed people. So every one of these people this is a brand new position. Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of War. These are all brand new positions that are created by Washington. And these are people that are going to help him make decisions, because Washington is not a seasoned politician. What that means is he's not someone that has a tremendous amount of political experience. Okay. So this is the big issue affecting the United States when the war is over. The fact that we owe $80 million. Should we be surprised that we owe that much money? Not really. All right. We were a country that was on the very beginning stages of its history, and we had to have money from other countries and sources to fight Britain. Because again, as I've said before, Britain's not going to loan us a bunch of money for us to in turn use that money to fight against Britain. Doesn't make any sense. Okay. So money is owed to countries, France, which is our biggest ally, and the Netherlands. Okay. And the reason why these two countries want to help is they want to see Britain become weaker. So they want to see a weakened Britain. And if that happens, everybody wins. Okay. Because if Britain weakens in terms of the power and authority it has, all the other countries in Europe and around the world will be better off for it. So France is going to bring in its Navy, which we don't have any at this time. It's going to provide some soldier support, but maybe the biggest is the naval support, and then obviously with money. So we owe them money. And we really want to make sure that we can show these countries in Europe that we are a legitimate nation, that we can handle our problems and we can pay back our money. You have to understand, being seen as a legitimate country around the world is probably the most important thing right now. Because for a lot of countries, if we fail, they're going to see our experiment of declaring independence from a monarchy, creating a more democratic government as being a failure. And they're going to say, well, that was a waste of time. And what's going to happen is we're going to end up probably back as a monarchy again, which is what everybody around the world is doing. Okay. So we owe money to these countries, but we also owe money to regular citizens. Okay. That bought these things called war bonds. And these basically are IOUs. Okay. I owe you X amount of money because you loaned us that money. We need to pay it back to you. And these citizens, they're expecting this money, and they're expecting it in a timely manner after the war is over, because they need it. Okay. Our economy is not exactly going to be great after the war is over. All right. And so Alexander Hamilton, remember, he's the guy who's in charge of the money. He's in charge of the economy as the Treasury Secretary. He's like, okay, We need to come up with a plan that makes us look like we have our act together, that makes us look as like we can handle our affairs, that's going to pay back the money that we owe, and it's going to trust other countries to see us as a good investment of maybe wanting to invest money or let us borrow money in the future. All that has to do with this idea of credit. Okay, just think about it. When you get a credit card down the road, the company that gives you that card, it says, basically, we're going to give you this card trusting that you're going to pay us back. Because if you don't, you're going to have to pay us a whole lot extra back in fees because you're not holding up your end of the bargain. All right. And so Hamilton wants to do two things. All right. He wants to do this thing called assumption, which basically means the federal government will pay back the money that the states owe and the federal government will owe instead of each individual state. This will look better for the country because the federal government's in charge of this, not each individual states. And again, the idea is that the federal government has more authority. Second thing they want to do is create a national bank where people can invest money. And I will be honest with you, this one right here is one of the most confusing things that we talk about all year. Basically, they want to make sure the government has the ability to borrow money, and they want to be able to have it all under one bank that will loan money to the federal government as needed and also allow people to invest in it. Okay, I'm not going to get too crazy with this because truly it's a very confusing thing to explain. Okay. And then the last thing is we're going to have tariffs on imported or taxes on imported goods, which are called tariffs, which is one of those terms. Basically, because we need to make money, we're going to encourage people in the United States here to buy goods made in the United States rather than buying them from a country like Britain or France. Because if we buy goods from Britain and France, where does that money go? It goes to those countries and it leaves the United States. All right. If the money stays here, there's more available. It's recirculated. If I, spend $2 on, something from a businessman in the North, he's going to use that $2 to invest in some way in his business or spend it elsewhere. And that's just going to keep recirculating and recirculating, and that will strengthen the economy. So all of these parts is what Hamilton wants to get done. Okay. Now, some states are not going to be in favor of this. And a lot of these states that are going to be opposed to this happen to be southern states. Okay. And one of the big opponents of this is a state of Virginia. Okay. Virginia is a southern state, just happens to be the home state of the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, and his close advisor and friend, James Madison. Both names you're going to see as the next two presidents upcoming. And they basically said, look, we paid off our debt. We don't have any debts anymore. So why are you wanting to take over the debt for all the states? Because what ends up happening is a state like Virginia is going to have to pay money in the form of taxes to bail out these other states that haven't really been doing a good job of paying off the debt. So it's like double dipping. And so basically the southern states are going to say no to this. They're not going to support it. And this is a law that has to be passed in Congress. So when he says he needs support and votes, we're talking about in Congress where the laws are made. Okay. And so in order to get this plan, he's going to have to get votes from southern states. So in any time you have what's called an impasse, which neither side's willing to kind of give, you have to come up with a compromise. Okay. And so the compromise is that the capital is going to be moved to a southern location, which is now Washington, D.C., and the support will go for the plan. And the whole idea of having the capital in the South is that it will maintain the interests of all the states, and the southern states will hope that their interests will be supported more so and not just forgotten if the capital is in the North. Okay. So one of the things that we see about Thomas Jefferson with the National Bank is he's going to continue to call this topic of the National Bank unconstitutional. And the reason why he says this is that he goes, if you go and look and read in the Constitution, you're not going to see any mention about the National Bank at all. Even today, you won't. And so this is going to be something that we're going to have to pay attention to a lot the rest of this year, is how we read and understand and interpret the Constitution, because it is one of the very big reasons why political parties happen. Okay. It's going to be one of the big things. Now, Hamilton on the flip side says we have to have a national bank. It's necessary. Okay. And so what it means is that these two people have very different beliefs on how we read and interpret the Constitution. And that's going to be the reason why these two guys, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, are going to be responsible for the creation of political parties. Okay. And just so we can kind of get a sense of how that works, first of all, some people say that early people in the government said we would never have political parties. Well, it's kind of naive, because eventually we were going to get to a point where people were going to disagree, so much so that they were kind of put into two groups. Okay. And because of their beliefs, those groups, like political parties today, like Republicans and Democrats or whatever, were going to be very divided and want to do a lot of what was best for their party. And so we saw that happening with these political parties. And another name for these political parties is called a faction. And this is what's called an organized political group. Okay. And so one of the things that we have to understand is that even if we look at these two big people in George Washington's cabinet, Jefferson and Hamilton, and they don't like this idea of groups dividing the country, these two guys are going to continue to have major disagreements. So much so that they're unwilling to work with each other on a variety of issues that affect the country. And they become more and more polarized. Like, think about the North Pole and the South Pole on a globe, very far apart from each other. And it's going to cause a major rift for George Washington. He's going to be so concerned about the future of the country because he sees how these political parties have divided the two most important people that he works with, which are Jefferson and Hamilton. Okay. And just to get you a sense of how we get started, and we're not going to go too much into this because this is something we're going to see later. Whoops, sorry. This more or less, and this was in the assignment that you worked on yesterday, this is more or less how very quickly we get into these two groups of Democratic Republicans and Federalists. Now, you'll notice that it says Democratic-Republican, okay? And that's something important to remember, that they're not Democrats, Republicans, it's Democratic Republican. And really, they were called Republicans, not the same Republicans of today. Neither of these political parties are anything like the political parties they are today. Different time of country's history, all that's different. So we're going to really have to pay attention to this, because the fact that these two men, again, Jefferson and Hamilton, are responsible for this, they're going to have people that follow them and agree with them. And that number is going to grow and grow and grow. And thus, at the same time, the interest in these political parties is going to grow more so than ever. And the easiest way we're going to see this is in the very first presidential election that comes after Washington leaves office. So when Washington says, I'm done, I'm not going to serve any more than 2 terms, that election of 1796 is going to show us just how divided we are as a country. Okay. More to go with that. There is going to be an exit ticket for this today that I want you to work on. Just some questions, check for understanding. If you also need time to finish the assignment from yesterday, please get that done, because that will be due on Wednesday, and I will talk to you then.